Okay, so let's switch gears a little bit about talk about long term and climate. That some things we're seeing evolve right in front of us today with the droughts that we're having out west. It seems like the West has been in a drought for several years now. Is that something that's normal, or have we changed, or the climate has changed now that we're seeing new equilibriums?
Zach?
Sure. Yeah. The what we're seeing in a lot of parts of the U.S., including the Southwest, is it's sometimes hard to differentiate between drought and what we would call aridification. And so in those areas, you may be seeing more of a just longer term shift in the precipitation characteristics. So maybe they're getting drier by an inch or two in there. And so when we use, the same drought monitoring techniques that we did 30 years ago, but it's a little drier, kind of looks like we're in drought all the time. And so there's actually a lot of research that's going on now that thinks about drought monitoring techniques that can be used in maybe a more uncertain climate, that can be a little bit more flexible to account for the fact that maybe some locations are getting wetter and drier.
Is that a natural process of locations getting wetter and drier all the time?
Sure, and it can be slow. We have seen that through time, but now what we're seeing is a warming trend. And, when you have a warmer atmosphere, it tends to be able to hold more water. Mm-hmm. And so when you hold more water, you would think that maybe warmer means wetter for everyone, but you also have to take into effect things like circulation changes as well. So trying to figure out, looking into the future, what areas are going to become drier and what areas are going to become wetter. That's very hard to do. But what we can rely on is look at good historical observations and see where those changes are happening to think about it. But I think it is something we've seen firsthand in the 21st century in the United States is some really drought-prone areas.
And a lot of those areas were marginal to start with, where they, like you said, drought-prone
Sure.
already.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the Southwest, they don't receive a lot of precipitation annually. A lot of their precipitation also comes in just a few events. So they get monsoon moisture in the Southwest. So that typically comes late summer. So if they miss out on that, it's a long time until that next monsoon the next year. And so it's really easy for them to go in these very long-term droughts that aren't punctuated with rainfall.
I once watched the National Geographic show on North Dakota, and when they settled that 120, 30 years ago, they were in a wet period, and then the rain stopped, they said, and they had to shift from being more corn to more small grains. So that's happened even in the last 100 or 200 years in locations.
Yes, and that's why we want to get climate information out to the public and out to thinking about agricultural producers, because if there's a signal that you're drying or wetting, maybe there's a need to change some small practices there. And so it's really important to think about those trends.
Sure. I also, like in the Roman Empire, they had in Tunisia, they had these structures, colosseums, in the middle of what's now a desert. And they said, well, 2,000 years ago, that wasn't a desert.
Yes.
So we've seen this go back and forth over the last several millennia. And don't we have like the Dondras dryer 6,000 years ago or something? It was really, really dry.
Oh, the Younger Dryas.
Younger dryer, yes. Younger Dryas.
And those two things, which happened after the last ice age, which were brief periods where we kind of returned to mini ice age conditions, and then it got out of it. But yeah, I was involved in some research when I was in Russia back about that for that period, about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, when it was much drier, especially in southwest Russia, where today it's very fertile. And the folks that I stayed with when I was over there, they were studying this for soil science, and so I got to take part in that study and see exactly what it did to that area.
A very, very dry period. So these extremes happen a lot. Now, whether they're all human made or not, that's the debate going on right now.
Oh, absolutely. And there is no doubt that people contribute at least partially to some of the things that we're seeing going on, especially when you look at local things. I mean, we're definitely responsible for heat islands and things like that. But when human and nature are contributing together, it's going to be tougher to ferret out who's doing what. But the bottom line is there's still changes that are going on. And being a very technologically advanced society, there's no reason why we shouldn't try to adapt to these changes or mitigate some of these changes that are going on. So,
and is it true that we get our thunderstorms are more intense but further apart? Because you mentioned something like that earlier, that just get lava rain in fewer events. Is that true that we're seeing these observations?
Oh, absolutely. We were seeing that, especially here in Missouri, where instead of getting 3.5 inches in a month with 7 events, we were getting 3.5 inches in 2 or 3 events. And of course, that represents a change. Anytime you change not only the average conditions, but the variability, that's also a climate change. And of course, we have to adapt to these heavier rains. And as Zach was talking about, a warmer atmosphere holding more water vapor, that's basically implying that your water cycle could be more vigorous, and that can result in those heavier periods of rain. So
we need to adapt to that, where we have less vulnerability to erosion, going no-till, and soil health becomes a big part of that too, that we get more water infiltration.
Absolutely.
Where it's all connected. One of the things I always couldn't quite get my fingers around is that the CO2 concentration is about around 400 parts per million now, or 300 parts per million.
It's around 410.
Okay, 400
now, somewhere,
which isn't very much. So how can that little affect us?
Well, and that's the whole issue with climate change, is that you've got this small change in CO2, but even that, if that raises the temperature, the atmosphere's ability to hold water vapor goes up exponentially. And of course, a lot of these model projections that show these huge changes in temperature for 2100 are based on that water vapor feedback, because molecule for molecule, CO2 is a fairly strong greenhouse gas compared to water vapor, but water vapor's effect is there because there's just so much of it in the atmosphere compared to CO2 or methane. So.
And just this morning, I heard on the radio about methane being several times more potent than CO2.
Yes, a molecule for molecule basis, methane is more potent. But of course, you have that potency for each molecule, but then of course you have to deal with the other side of that issue, is this pure concentration. So,
and they were saying that about 12 years methane will last in the atmosphere. So there can be some cycling out.
Yeah, I think methane has a slower cycle in the atmosphere than water, which is 8 days.
Okay.
Roughly 8 to
8
10,
days from time it's evaporated
to
it comes back down. Wow.
Yep.
And then finally, nitrous oxide is another one in a greenhouse gas.
Yeah, that's another greenhouse gas that can be an issue, and I forget at the moment where those emissions come from, if those are automobile or where those come from, but those can be an issue as well.
I think the consensus is that agriculture contributes about 10% of the greenhouse gases, whereas transportation and energy make up the bulk of that.
Absolutely.
But agriculture has opportunity to sequester a lot of that in the soil.
Absolutely. Now I don't know much about
Right.
that. Zach may know more about that than I do.
Yeah,
But,
and it's certainly not something I'm an expert on, but there are a lot more a crop or climate resilient crop practices that can kind of help with that, and plants are great for taking in that carbon dioxide and can kind of serve as a sink for that as well. So it's something I think you've seen a lot more in the agricultural community in the 21st century, is kind of an awareness and some small changes in practice there.
Right, our perennial crops, we can put a lot more carbon back into
Correct.
back into the soil, and that's really good. Anything else on our long term climate that you want to bring up, or?
No, other than that we have seen temperatures warm in the later part of the 20th century. They were kind of in a holding pattern for a while. Now we're seeing a little bit of a trend upward again, and of course the models tell us it's going to be warmer later on. But when it comes to agriculture, the key is variability. How variable does our precipitation come? I hear this from folks out in the field all the time: is we'll adapt to what comes 20 years down the road. I need to know what it's going to be like this summer and next summer.
Right.
So,
but that's going to be so variable, even month to month, week to week, as we saw this summer.
oh, absolutely. This summer was just a study in some contrasts.
And by having practices that can make you resilient to that, whether it's having not enough rainfall or too much, that's the key.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where science comes in. And that's what MU is doing so well. We're doing these research on ag practices we're always trying to find ways to improve upon what we do and make us more resilient. And it doesn't matter the cause of something, is if we're more resilient and can adapt, that's always the best outcome.
Just in my career, where early on a drought could result in single-digit yields of corn. I've seen that in like the 80 and so in the 88. But now we get a very similar pattern, and we'll still make 3/4 of a crop because the ag practices are much better, much more resilient, and also the breeding efforts that have gone in for drought tolerance is just tremendous.
That's just been the thing that during my career, I mean, I've been here now 26 years, and we had done a study on corn and wheat production, soybean production. And in the beginning of the century, you saw these little bounces in yields that were related to weather. But then as technology, they got much better, the yields just went up exponentially. And the weather signals got bigger, but you are still out producing what you could 70 years ago.
So it's amazing what technology has given us. But as we talked right before we aired, one of the best ways to look at our 4,000 or 5,000 years is our tree rings. And your colleague, Mike Stambaugh, is looking at those. And Tony, you had some good information on that. He took your class.
Yeah, Mike took my class to look at El Nino and longer term variations, and he applied that to his tree ring research. And that research has a unbroken string of climate records going back at least 1,000 years. And then they've got tree ring records that go back as far as I think it was 15 or 20,000 years ago.
Goodness.
And it's just amazing what that laboratory's doing. They just go out and find old trees that are uncovered by the Missouri River. They do carbon dating on them, and he gave me a gift of a 3,000-year-old tree after he took my class.
Oh my goodness.
And you wouldn't be able to tell it apart from today's trees, but the carbon dating said it was 3,000 years old. So
And you can see the El Ninos and the La Ninas in those
in
rings.
the thicknesses of the rings, it'll
Wow.
be reflected in that.
Wow, that's just amazing, and it's probably a rich source of data for you all for your predictions.
Yeah, it does kind of help us there because what we can see is the thing about tree rings is it gives you a sense of the combined effect of temperature and precipitation, and so you can use that information when you tell folks about what to expect for the upcoming year.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Zach, you got some big shoes to fill, I think, just from the temporary when Tony was in there, of course, with Pat Gannan, but it sounds like you got the excitement and the knowledge to really take this to the next level.
Yeah, thank you. And I know a lot around the state are familiar with Pat Gannan and Tony. And so I'm excited to take over, and I'm glad that they'll be around to kind of help show me the ropes on everything. But hopefully in a few months I'm more up to speed and ready for the task.
You know, it's something that everybody likes to talk about, the weather and what's going to happen. And boy, if you can make that prediction a little bit tighter, just a week or two ahead, that's huge. And in summer, a little bit longer term, where we can maybe manage our crops a little bit differently, that makes a big difference too.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, it's and what happened last year does make a difference for next year too, because you still see these carryovers.
Yes, especially with drought impacts too. You know, this was a tough early summer for drought, but it was also very dry last fall as well. And I think some of the issues with hay and pastures this year were because there was already shortages going into the year. So that context is really important.
So that dry fall should have been a trigger for us to think, I might need to plan a little differently for this next summer.
Yes, definitely, and it is pretty rare to get back-to-back years with drought at the severity and statewide coverage that we've seen in 2022 and 2023. But you're right, maybe we should always kind of be planning and what's the worst case scenario, because for some producers it might have been a worst case scenario having those back-to-back droughts.
Right. Well, that's all we have today at Tim's Take. We really want to thank Tony Lupo and Zach Leeser for this great discussion. And we could go on and on and on and get into a lot of details on research and forecasts, but all good things have to come to an end. So this is it for Tim's Take, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us here.